Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you on Channel 9 and also on WJOPLP Newburyport, FM 96.3. We're also live streaming on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm delighted to welcome today's guests. First up, we have Susan Edwards, who's the retiring and outgoing Executive Director of the Museum of Old Newbury. Later on in today's show, we'll pass the baton on with being joined by Bethany Groff Dorau, the incoming Executive Director of the museum. But first off, let's talk with Susan. Susan Edwards, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show.
Good morning, Mary. It's lovely to be here with you.
It's wonderful to have you and to see you. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time.
Well, you know, Susan, the Museum of Old Newbury is a much cherished institution in Newburyport, and you were at the helm for 7 years. And I wanted to invite you on the show today to thank you for your tenure there, and also to find out about some of the highlights of your work at the museum. To that end, the first question I wanted to pose to you is to ask you what changes you've observed or initiated in the mission, the membership, or activities of the museum over the time that you were there, especially what was most exciting or gratifying for you personally, and as, of course, a great lover of history.
Our mission certainly has not changed. The museum has been around since 1877, and our mission has been to, very loosely, to preserve and present the history, the art, the culture of Old Newbury. And Old Newbury actually means Newbury, Newburyport, West Newbury, and Plum Island. So all of those contiguous communities are the ones that we represent. And so that remains our mission, but the way in which we have presented that has changed significantly. When I first arrived at the museum, it was a much quieter place, not as many open hours, not as many activities. We actually increased our membership, almost doubled it from about 300 to just about 600. So we had many more people involved. Our volunteer base expanded enormously. And so there were a lot of people who immediately became more invested in the museum and what it had to offer. We increased our programming from about 6 programs a year to about 30 programs a year.
Oh.
So that, again, we were bringing in many more people to the museum and introducing them to our own history, their own history. And again, there was a new level of investment in the organization, not just through membership, but through spreading the word. We've done a lot of public outreach over the last 7 years, and to make it much more of a community museum for all of our friends and visitors to Newburyport.
And it has been very successful. I know I've been to programs there that were absolutely standing room only, and many programs that stay with me to this day. So it's just been such a, people who live in Greater Newburyport just love our history, and the fact that there's so much of it. And it's just wonderful that you are able to be, shepherds of that history, and to share it with people, and to engage the community in learning more and satisfying people's curiosity. So those are impressive increases, both in the membership and the outreach and the level of engagement that you've successfully been able to link the community to. So I was also curious, though, because you've been there for 7 years, and I know how much you love history and getting into the details of it. So I wanted to ask you, over the course of your tenure, what 1 or 2 historical figures have you enjoyed learning the most about, or been most intrigued or impressed by, and why?
That's a tough one because there are so many.
I bet.
Newburyport has such a cast of characters with the
Yeah.
masters and the merchants and the ministers. But I think probably the 2 that stand out most in my mind are a man and a woman. one from the 19th century and one from the latter half of the 19th century into the mid 20th century. And my first favorite is Dr. Henry Coit Perkins.
Yeah.
And he was a child of an innkeeper, and he and his wife, curiously enough, were both born a week apart at the Wolf Tavern.
Oh.
And so they had they knew each other practically from birth.
Yeah.
He went on to Harvard, became a doctor, and returned to Newburyport pretty much for country practice.
Mhm.
He had a very, very curious mind, brilliant man, and we're fortunate to have many of his papers at the museum, as well as lenses that he created for
Mm.
microscopes. Uh, he uh, he was an amazing Renaissance sort of man,
Mhm.
and he actually developed among the first, daguerreotype
Mm.
in the United States. When Louis Daguerre was practicing on creating the daguerreotype over in France, Perkins was right along there with him.
Mm.
He didn't miss a trick. He built his own camera, and the amazing thing about his daguerreotypes is that they're city views, so that they're
Oh.
almost like aerial. So he was way ahead of his time, and the
Yeah.
museum owns four of those 1839 daguerreotypes. So that's very exciting. And we have his in his crabbed hand all of the notes that he took. I got up at 7 a.m. this morning and set up my camera. So it's a wonderful,
Oh.
rich story of a
Yeah.
little known man.
But
And
what
then my
wonderful.
other favorite
No, go
is
ahead.
Laura Coombs Hills,
Oh.
and she was born in 1859, died in 1952,
Mm.
and again was a child of two very old Newburyport families. And her father was very involved with the institution for savings. She and her sisters grew up here in Newburyport, and she became a significantly well-known artist
Oh.
in the late 19th century. And she started her career by developing miniature portraits on ivory,
Oh.
very, very detailed, delicate work, and did that for a number of years. She set up her own studio on Chestnut Street in Boston, which is on Beacon Hill, and that
Mhm.
building actually still remains today. And she started showing in Boston. Usually, her shows sold out in the first 2 or 3 hours of
Mm.
the morning,
Mm.
and so she was successful enough that she could build her own house in Newburyport, and it was called the Goldfish, and it's actually right on the border between Newburyport and West Newbury. She maintained the studio in Boston. She traveled widely, and we have her letters, which describe her trips in England and in Europe with her sister. And by midlife, her eyesight began to fail. So she decided to take her talents and leave miniatures behind. It was too detailed. And she started up an equally successful career in pastel portraits,
Interesting.
portraits of people, portraits
Mhm.
of flowers. And again, the museum holds the most substantial collection of her work in in the United States. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston has some pieces in their collection, but we have the largest collection of her work to represent, and have had several exhibitions over the last 15 or 20 years of her work, and we now have a permanent exhibition at the Cushing House.
Wonderful. What great stories and what distinctive individuals, Susan. So thank you.
Very, very,
Thank
very
you for
strong
that.
individuals, both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And both innovators.
Yes, yes.
So thank you for that. That's terrific. Well, Susan, the museum has a lot of artifacts, and I'm curious also to find out what one or two objects or artifacts in the museum's collection or archives have been the most illuminating or exciting for you to investigate, research, and now share with us?
Well, I will say that over the last 7 years, I have gone down a lot of rabbit holes, uh, and uh, and there are some incredible treasures at the
Mhm.
museum. For a museum and historical society of our size, we have a very very important collection of American decorative arts and fine art. Uh,
Yeah.
and other pieces representing our local history. But I think one of the things that I love about it so much is that it doesn't just represent Old Newbury history, it's representative of American history as well.
Yeah.
And our feelers went wide out into the colonies and eventually across the country. Um, but I do have a couple of favorite pieces. Um, One is actually a very small collection that belonged to a man named John Simpson. He was a shipmaster. He was very involved in the Newburyport Marine Society. And back in the 1970s, we had on loan it's actually a matched pair of whale's teeth on which
Oh.
he did scrimshaw work.
Oh.
So he was one of Newburyport's very own scrimshanders. And these two teeth they're polychrome. They're not just the black as you see on so many pieces of scrimshaw, but they've got red and green and blue in it.
Oh.
And the carvings on those two teeth tell an incredible story of this man's life. His daughter married into the Whitney family who lived on Ting Street. So one of the whale's teeth has a carving of his house on Washington
Mm.
Street. It has an emblem of the St. John's Masonic Lodge in Newburyport,
Mhm.
and it has his ship, which was called the Alioth. And in addition to that, there's a patriotic female figure and a flag and an inscription that says "Outward Bound."
Mm.
Uh, the other tooth he made for the brother of his daughter's husband, and his
Uh-huh.
name was George Whitney. He didn't
Oh.
have as long and happy a life as John Simpson. He was lost at sea as a young
Oh.
man. And that other tooth has an engraving of the house on Ting Street. He was very involved in the Odd Fellows in Newburyport, and again, there's an insignia for that. His initials, GW, and it says from JS,
Mhm.
and an image of his ship as well.
Mm.
So it's interesting to see how these two families became so involved with one another's lives
Mhm.
over the years, and that you can tell that much about the people and the places that they lived on these two teeth.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And also, I love learning new words. And now, scrimshander is a new word to me. But I'm glad to know it. I wouldn't want to end my life without knowing the word scrimshander. It's just too distinctive. And that just sounds like such a remarkable story. You have biographies on these teeth.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
yeah, so that's really great. Thank you very much for that description,
And the
Susan.
other piece is something that has come to the museum way more recently. And that's the weathercock from the First Religious Society, which came from the church to the museum in early 2000, well, late 2018, early 2019. And we created a gallery around it. It is in the second floor of the museum. It's on permanent exhibit.
Mhm.
And the wonderful thing about this weathercock, as it's called, is that it was made by the first documented weather vane maker in the United States. There are 5 of his weather vanes extant, and
Mhm.
now the museum has one of those 5. His name was Shem Drown, and he practiced in Boston. One of his weather vanes is at the Old North Church, another at Massachusetts Historical Society. And so we feel very, very fortunate to have this. When I was doing research on it after we received it, and we were actually awarded a grant to purchase it from the church. And the date on it, was attributed to either Shem Drown or his son, Thomas Drown, who also was a weather vane maker. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could find out which man actually made it? And in combing through the historic newspapers that are online from the archival center at the library, I found something in the Newburyport Herald from 1830 saying that the weather vane had been atop the church in Market Square since 1725, which very clearly made it the work of Shem Drown and not of his son. And then the newspaper article goes on to tell the history of the weather vane and how at one point he had fallen off and bumped his nose. And to this day, visitors to the museum will be able to see that little bump in his nose. So again, that's a really special and wonderful, wonderful piece among many hundreds of thousands of others.
Well, those are wonderful stories. And I know, Susan, that one of your aims at the museum was to bring the artifacts to life. And you have a gift. By telling their stories, you bring them to life and just create much curiosity about seeing them.
Well, it's interesting. I think, different people become involved in the museum profession for different reasons. And I have to say that one of the loves when I first started were objects, and not just for their intrinsic beauty, but also because of the stories behind them. And that's what really drives me to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do a wonderful job of it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Susan, I wanted to ask you what period in Greater Newburyport's history have you found to be the most exciting to learn about, and why? Because the history covers, from the 1600s on. So there's a lot of, there's a huge canvas there. And so I'm just curious if there's any particular era in the history that you have found most intriguing or engaging for you personally.
I have to say that my two favorite periods are the colonial and federal periods. The great age of sail in Newburyport, all of it's wonderful, but I'm attracted to those two earlier periods. After they've gotten settled and built their houses, the architecture and the community life of those periods is what interests me most.
Yeah. And there's plenty for both of those periods in Newburyport, Lord knows, to study and to probe and explore. Well, Susan, a friend of mine has a saying that I like a lot, and that's that history is hope. And for that reason, I wanted to ask you my next question. I wondered if there's a person, event, or a particular time period that you find resonates for you the most in reference to our current pretty turbulent struggles around racial history, preserving democracy and voting rights, and conflicts between partisanship and patriotism in country. And if so, what can we learn from that past era to help us navigate the present, to find the hope in history, so to speak?
Well, one would hope that we could learn a lot. The museum is actually doing a one-day symposium in October at the Governor's Academy in Byfield, which is race and slavery in New England from 1700 to 1870. And we've invited 10 scholars from New England colleges and universities to come and present that day. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention people like William Lloyd Garrison and Thomas Wentworth Higginson, whose role in the abolitionist movement got him ousted from the First Religious Society. But I think it's also the stories of the untold people. We received a research inquiry at the museum the other day about a woman named Nancy Gardner Prince. And I have to admit that it was not a name that was familiar to me. And I started doing some research about her. She was born in Nantucket to a Black seaman, and he died a few months before she was born. Her mother, who was descended from a man who he was supposedly, quote, stolen from Africa, came to this country and won his freedom by fighting in the American Revolution. And so Nancy and her mother, after her father died, found their way to Boston and then to Newburyport. And Nancy became an abolitionist. She married a man with whom she actually traveled to Russia, and her husband worked in the court of the Tsar, and she became involved there. But when she came back to this country, she took what she had learned in her European travels and applied it and tried to do as much good as she possibly could. She went to Jamaica and to help the people down there. She came back. She worked with William Lloyd Garrison on all of his projects. She published her own, or actually his paper, published her autobiography in the 1840s. And when you look at somebody like that and see that the impact that they made and the changes, she helped to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act.
Wow.
And I think that those are the kinds of people who give us hope today.
Absolutely.
That, you know, we need to bring those stories to light. And we all need to work together as those people in the 19th century did to achieve what we need to achieve today.
Yeah, incredibly well put, Susan. And yeah, there is inspiration in someone like her, because things certainly looked much bleaker then than they do even now. And so thank you for that. That's a really important story and an excellent one to share. And I'm thrilled to hear about the symposium happening in October. We'll keep our eye out for that. So. Well, I wanted to ask you also about a story that you wrote that appeared in the museum newsletter and also in the Daily News a few weeks ago, because I was just fascinated by the Abigail Stone story and its long journey home. So could you tell us, Susan, about the Abigail Stone, who made it and why, and how did you find out about it?
It's a wonderful story. And it goes back to January of 2020. I was here working from home on what I like to think of as a rather tedious project. I think it was a budget or a grant proposal. The phone rang. And I could see that it said Pook and Pook Auctioneers. We get a lot of telephone calls of people who say, oh, I have something from Newbury. Maybe you would be interested in it. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a hard sell. And it was a man named Ron Pook who owns the auction house. And he said, I have a gravestone that belonged to a very young child. And he said, I know it's not from Pennsylvania, and I believe it's from the Newburyport area. And would your museum be interested in having it for your collection? And I said, we would love to accept it. I will accept it on behalf of the museum, but not for our collection. And while he was talking, I went on to find a grave and looked up the name Abigail Chase, which is the one on the stone, and found that she is listed in the Bridge Street Cemetery in West Newbury, along with all of her family. So I said, what we would like to do with this stone is to reinstall it so that her stone is back with her parents and her siblings. And he was thrilled. He paid for the transportation of the stone. And just last Sunday, it went into the ground at the Chase family plot. And the museum has been working with the trustees of the Bridge Street Cemetery. And we're actually going to be having a little ceremony next Wednesday afternoon at 1 to unveil the stone.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
So it's, you know, I call it the power of local history. When something that's been missing for 300, almost 300 years comes home again, it's such an incredible statement.
It's a wonderful story. And I'm curious, so what was it about the Abigail Stone that made somebody want to steal it in the first place?
Well, it is very beautiful. But back in the mid 20th century, there was a trend for people who went in and stole gravestones out of cemeteries. And again, curiously enough, during the period of the bicentennial, there were a lot of incidents throughout New England of gravestones that had been stolen. I think somebody thought it was very attractive and they wanted to have it. I remember as a teenager visiting one of my ancestral sites down in Connecticut. It was the home of my 10th great grandfather. And as my mother and I walked up the path to greet the people who lived there at the time, the entire front walk was lined with gravestones. And they
Oh,
said, isn't this wonderful? We have these
oh,
old gravestones lining our path. So, people did that kind of thing. I like to think
yeah.
that that's long past and that that
Hmm.
doesn't happen anymore. But it is a very beautiful stone carved
Hmm.
by, it's attributed to the carving of one of the Mulliken brothers, who
Hmm.
were from a Bradford stone carving family,
Hmm.
and were probably the most prominent after John Hartshorn in Essex County.
Hmm. Well, I'm really glad that that Abigail Chase's gravestone will return to her family plot, because it seems like, I guess the phrase, a sacred breach,
Yes,
to
yes.
remove a gravestone from its resting place and from those connections with the other gravestone that really form a family history. So, so I'm really glad that the auction house returned it, and that she's been returned. And I'm glad you're having a ceremony
Well,
to mark
so
the
are we.
occasion.
And we owe such a debt of gratitude to Ron Pook, who said,
Uh-huh.
I don't auction gravestones. It's just
Yeah,
not right.
yeah,
And
it just,
so he's a wonderful man, and we're
yeah.
very, very indebted to him.
Yeah, and it's a great story. So, um, Susan, I know you will have an ongoing relationship with the museum, that you continue to do part-time, actually talking to you before the show, nearly full-time work some weeks. But what will you miss about being ED, if anything? And also paired with that, what are you looking forward to about the next chapter in your life?
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to continuing on at the museum for a time, as a collections and development manager. As I've said earlier, the collections are my passion, and I'm so looking forward to working with Bethany and uncovering some more stories and acquiring new things for the museum. I'm also looking forward to having some free time to do my own research,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
to stop and smell the roses.
Absolutely. Well, all right. I see that Bethany is here. Let's bring Bethany on screen, and have her join our conversation. Hi, Bethany. Welcome.
Morning.
Nice to see you.
Hello, Mary. Hello, Susan.
Good morning, Bethany.
Well, Bethany, you had a long stint at another much cherished local institution with Historic New England, and particularly with Spencer Pierce Little Farm, and both the extraordinary historic home and the amazing and wonderful and glorious farm animals housed there. And I wonder what made you interested in picking up the baton from Susan and moving from Spencer Pierce and Historic New England to the Museum of Old Newbury.
Well, I have been extremely lucky in my tenure at Historic New England. I was with Historic New England for 21 years, which is crazy because I know I'm only 28 years old, but somehow,
Yeah.
somehow I managed that one. And I have, Historic New England is an incredible organization and really sort of taught me the best practices in so many aspects of preservation. What I really fell in love with is Newbury, is local, hyper local history. And there's something, for me at the Spencer Pierce Little Farm and at the Coffin House and the Sweat Ilsley House, there's a
Yeah.
little group of museums that are owned by Historic New England and others that Historic New England has touched over its time, that really formed this nucleus of an understanding of the community in the 17th and particularly in the 17th and 18th century, although, moving up to the present. And then,
Mhm.
so it's knowable in a way that in some cases, state, regional, national, international
Mm.
history, you can know it quite well. But I know almost everyone that lived in Newbury in the 1650s. You,
Yeah.
you give me a name and I can tell you something that I know about them, or I know their cousin, or I know where they lived, or I know what court case they were in. So, for me, I just, I've become like my world has narrowed and narrowed at the same time as it's expanding. And now this really is, I'm unemployable outside of this job. Where could I possibly have gone to be in, a sort of a expert on Newbury history? It is my passion. And Susan and I certainly share that love of the stories. Mine is, I love the objects. I love the stories that tie the objects together. I love the record, I guess, in a way. I mean, not that Susan doesn't, certainly, but court cases for me, just absolutely, roll my socks up and down. Diaries, newspapers, I just love it. And in this, again, 17th, and really in this community up until the 20th century, you're dealing with a fairly contained population of people that you can really get to know, and how they know each other, and where they had their dinner sometimes, and who they were fighting with. It's really wonderful. And so, I mean, this position for me, I joked with Susan that this is the only other job, again, in the world I'm qualified for. And I was very lucky that Susan was advocating for me to be included in the transition process. So the board has been wonderful. We've done programs together. So it was a natural fit for me, and also a very flattering thing that other people agreed that it was right for me. So I love it. Every day I go home and just love it.
It seems like almost a karmic necessity that the baton passed between the two of you, and it's certainly a match made in history heaven. Absolutely.
Everything just fell into place, I think, the way that it needed to be. So, certainly there were a lot of people involved in that conversation, and it's, I'm very lucky to have had the support that I had as I came on.
Well, I think we're all lucky to have it work out this way. So, well, I was hoping, Bethany, that you could tell us something about the legacy you see yourself inheriting from Susan's time at the museum, and how you want to build upon that legacy with your own vision for the museum to grow and fulfill its potential moving forward.
Well, I mean, I think your listeners, and certainly you got a taste of the legacy listening to Susan for the last half hour. There is such a knowledge and passion that has been there for the last, during her tenure. I think I can only hope that at some point, I do think already I have these stories that sort of burble up out of me when I'm talking to people. I mean, I'm going to become very socially awkward because I go to, I go to taverns with my husband, and we sit down, and then I tell him a story, and he has to sort of say, "Are you talking about a living person or a dead person?" And I say, "Does it matter? Does it matter? They're so interesting." But, and luckily he totally gets that about me. But to have that level of, again, knowledge and engagement with people from the past, from the present, it really creates this sort of mystical time travel experience, I think, for people, who come here, who can look at their house. I was talking about this in a post on the newsletter last week. You can look down a street in this city or anywhere in Old Newbury. I live in West Newbury. I can look down my street and I can see 7 incarnations of that street, because I've looked at all the maps and I've read all the, documents that have to do with all the houses on my road. And, and I know who lived in my house, and I know what their shoes look like. And there's a wonderful, I hope that I can build on that passion. And I hope that I can encourage other people to feel the same way about their house, about their family. I think genealogy for a very long time, which we do a lot of genealogical research here, I think for a long time that's been the province of a select group of people who kept excellent records. And with the opening of records internationally, and just the amount of technology that now can be employed in looking at those records, I think we're looking at an opportunity to open up sort of family history to a lot of people for whom it was not accessible.
Yeah.
I would say most of the research requests that I am getting, that I'm involved with since I've been here, have not been for the grand scions of Newburyport families. It's for, Nancy, whose great grandfather had a store somewhere, on the waterfront, and he's from Ireland, or a Lithuanian family that wants to know, where their ancestor may have gone to church because they weren't Orthodox. I mean, interesting, different cultural, it is for everybody. There's something here for everyone.
Yeah. I love the way that you talk about that blending of the present with the past, so that you have almost a kind of holographic time travel in your mind while you're walking around these hallowed streets. And, you know, it would be wonderful for people who have less well-known ancestors, but generations of family who have been around here, to be also to be able to share in a more personal way, as you're describing, that sense of the past meeting the present and being informed by it, as because history is hope. Or we hope history is hope for many of us anyway, as Susan and I were talking about. So thank you for that, Bethany. That's very evocative. I appreciate that. And I would certainly listen to any story that you were telling, whether it was a living person or a dead person, because they come alive.
Well, have me back
when
on.
you're
I got a million of them.
talking about them. So what are you looking forward to the most about your work at the museum, Bethany?
Well, you know, I had a funny moment. I was trying to think about the people that I am good friends with, who I know love history, but who have never been here, and what I would need to do to get them here. And I did a little experiment. I have 3 friends that live in Newbury, in Old Newbury. One lives in Newburyport, 2 live in Newbury, in West Newbury. And I went into our collection here and I pulled 3 items that have a direct relationship to their lives. And I thought, you know, this could be like a, you know, hit me, tell me, you know, tell me about your life and I will give you something here that is relevant to you. And it's not, you know, living people. It's not just about the dead people that lived in your house. It's about you. You know, you want to know, you know, how big the orchard was that was next to your house. I can probably find that out. You know, I think what we need to continue to do here, and Susan made amazing strides in this regard, but we need to be the memory for this community. And that is so much of what has happened in the past. You know, we have an incredible opportunity to keep the memory of this community in this community.
Yeah.
So when people are, you know, have an object or a document, something that has to do with the rich history of this area, it's not going to Boston or to, you know, Washington, D.C. It's staying here.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something about that continuity of experience in a community that is so rich and valuable. You can come to one place. And of course, you can also go to the library. There's also the Custom House. We have a campus, but we here have that memory. We have that community memory here. And I want people who are here now to see that, that that's what we are and that's what we can do. And I want them to feel it. It's not just I have a factual question that I want to have answered. It's that this place is home. We all define home in different ways, but we all mostly define home by a feeling of community and the memories that you have in a place and the stories around a place. And that's what we have. We are the home. We're the memory. My friend calls me the speaker for the dead. That's sort of what I feel like we are.
Well, which is an honorable and neglected role. So good for you. And I love the way you talk about, I guess I put it this way, renewing the memory so that it enriches the present and gives us a deeper sense of what we're grounded in. And we can only better understand ourselves with that kind of connection to the past. So thank you, brilliantly put, and a wonderful way to build upon the legacy that Susan described in bringing artifacts to life and creating really a living memory as you're talking about it. So there's a bridge there.
Well, and there's another thing there too, just very quickly. I know you were talking about how history is hope, and that was very evocative. Thank you for that. I'm going to keep that with me, because what I find is that history has been employed, especially recently, in a rigidity and a narrowing and a doctrinaire sort of, this is what history was and it was better then. And we're going to make, you know, this is what history is. And that there is no such thing as what history is. There are facts. And then there are all the different ways that humans experienced life And if you study the way that people actually lived and you listen to them and listen to experience, it is expansive.
Yeah.
You know, Puritan New England was an incredibly sexy time.
And
If you pay
it's not its
attention.
image.
No, but nobody would. You have to really look for that. You have to really
Yeah.
empathize with people. You know, same way if you look at Newburyport, the number of foreign-born people in Newburyport at the start of World War I is staggering. It was something like 22% of draftees
Wow.
were foreign-born.
Yeah.
This was a very international, you know, racially diverse. You wouldn't know that from, you know, the narrative of Newburyport as the great seaport.
Yeah.
You know, this was a working class factory town in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's so much richer and it's so much more expansive. So we have to continue to employ the expansiveness of history and not allow it to be boxed in and used for
Restricted,
nefarious
right.
purposes.
Right. No nefarious use of history. Open it up, expand it.
That's right. Expand it.
Well, you know, at this point, I'd like to invite you, Susan, to say anything that you might like to. I mean, I know you're still going to be around at the museum, but is there anything you would like to say to the museum community and to the community at large by way of farewell or anything else you'd like to say as you move away from your administrative leadership role at the museum?
I'm not ready to say farewell yet.
Good. Good.
I have such an gratefulness to the people of Old Newbury, for the members, for the public at large, for our volunteers, for such rich years in Old Newbury. And I will certainly miss that on a day-to-day basis. I remember several years ago, there were 5 under 5-year-olds who came to the museum and with their caregiver. And she had said, do you mind if we just come in the museum long enough so that the children can see the hallway? And I said, oh, absolutely. And there was this one little boy, I would guess he was 4 or 5, and he took this hugely deep breath and he said, oh, it smells so good. It smells like history. And I thought, that's what I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss the smell of history.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So excited that
That's
Bethany
a great story.
is taking the helm, and I look so forward to working with her in the months ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And Bethany, anything that you'd like to say in addition to the wonderful things you've already said as to the community at large or the museum membership as you take the helm and navigate forward with the museum?
You know, I would just say to the community and to anyone that's listening, you know, we are, try me, ask me a question, give me a challenge, let me help you find something that makes your life broader or more interesting or answer a question for you. You know, give us a try. There are a bunch of ways to be involved. Become a member and then use that membership, come to programs and events. You know, give it a go. And I also want to say the board and volunteers at this place have been and will continue to be an amazing resource. So that is another way to be involved. You know, if you are interested in history and community leadership and want to have a place, there are places here for you as well in different capacities as well as just being a member. So try me.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. Gosh, it's been so much fun and so exciting to talk to both of you. We're in good hands. We've been in good hands, and we're in good hands moving forward, preserving the memories and making them anew. So yeah, try it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So Susan, good luck with your endeavors. And
you.
you mentioned that you're one of the things that you in addition to the ongoing work you're doing with the museum on collections, you're going to be moving more into some of your own research. So please keep me posted, and you have a standing invitation to come back.
Thank you. I would love to
Talk
do
about
that.
that research. Bethany, I know you're always working on researching, and you may have another book you're working on. So keep me posted.
I definitely will. And I'll come on and tell you a story anytime. So
wonderful.
let me know.
Living or dead, I don't care.
They're all interesting.
Thank you
Thank
both
you,
so
Mary.
much. It's
Thank
been
you.
my pleasure. Farewell. Thank you both
Bye-bye.
very much. So thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you'll join us again next Thursday at 9 on Channel 9 for the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Court Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show. Go to ncmhub.org, click on the YouTube icon, click on playlist, and then scroll down. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. and will be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just click on the cloud icon at ncmhub.org and scroll down. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.